There is a paradox that quietly shapes the financial life of millions of responsible, hard-working people. The more they think about money, the more distant financial peace seems to become. What often feels like prudence, constantly checking balances, anticipating problems, mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios, can slowly transform into a daily rehearsal of scarcity. Instead of creating security, the mind begins to train itself to expect threat. Over time, this pattern does not simply affect emotions, it shapes perception, decisions, and the body's internal chemistry. Many people living in this pattern do not see themselves as anxious or fearful. On the contrary, they believe they are being mature and responsible. They work hard, try to plan ahead, and carry the quiet burden of making sure everything will be okay. Yet beneath this effort lives a form of exhaustion that rarely gets named. The nervous system remains on constant alert, scanning for potential financial problems, preparing for disappointment, and anticipating loss long before it happens. Peace becomes conditional. Rest begins to feel undeserved. Researchers and thinkers in neuroscience and mind-body studies have long suggested that repeated emotional states can become biological habits. Joe Dispenza often describes how the body can become addicted to familiar emotional patterns, even when those patterns revolve around stress or lack. When the body becomes accustomed to the emotion of financial fear, it starts reacting to the possibility of loss as if it were already real. The mind believes it is protecting the future, but the body is living in a continuous present of tension. Bruce Lipton offers a helpful image to understand this dynamic. Imagine the mind as a biological garden. Every thought and emotional reaction becomes part of the soil. If that soil is consistently saturated with signals of danger, scarcity, or urgency, even the seeds of opportunity struggle to grow in a healthy way. The issue is not the desire for prosperity itself. Wanting stability, comfort, and freedom is natural. The deeper issue is attempting to create abundance while operating from a nervous system that has been trained primarily to survive rather than to create. Excessive financial worry often disguises itself as responsibility. Yet responsibility and chronic mental alarm are not the same thing. True financial awareness involves attention, clarity, and thoughtful action. Obsession, however, is a loop, an endless cycle of thinking about money, without changing the emotional posture from which those thoughts emerge. This difference is subtle but powerful. One state organizes the mind, the other traps it. The most surprising shift happens when people realize that prosperity rarely begins with a change in numbers. It begins with a change in the internal relationship to safety. When the nervous system stops interpreting money as a permanent threat, perception widens, creativity returns, and opportunities that once seemed invisible begin to appear within reach. The relationship many people develop with money rarely begins in spreadsheets or bank accounts. It begins in emotion. For a large number of adults, money quietly becomes associated with moments of tension, disappointment, rejection, or even humiliation experienced earlier in life. A missed payment in childhood, a parent's worried conversations at night, the embarrassment of not being able to afford something others easily had. These moments leave emotional impressions that the mind carries forward. Over time, money stops being a neutral tool and starts becoming a psychological signal of possible danger. When that association forms, the brain naturally enters a pattern of vigilance. Instead of interacting with money as a resource that can be managed and directed, the mind begins treating it as something that must constantly be guarded against loss. Thoughts about finances multiply throughout the day. The same concerns replay again and again. What if something goes wrong? What if there is not enough later? What if one unexpected expense destroys the balance that took months to build? This repetition may appear logical on the surface, yet internally it activates the same neural pathways involved in threat detection. Neuroscience has shown that the brain does not distinguish very well between imagined threats and real ones when emotional intensity is present. Each time the mind rehearses financial disaster, the body responds with subtle stress signals. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and attention narrows. In this state, the nervous system prepares for survival, not for creativity or long-term strategy. The individual believes they are thinking carefully about money, yet biologically they are operating under the same internal chemistry that accompanies danger. This narrowing of perception produces an invisible consequence. When the mind is dominated by urgency, it becomes harder to recognize opportunities that require patience, collaboration, or creative thinking. Possibilities that might otherwise appear obvious are overlooked because attention is fixed on avoiding loss. The psychological field becomes smaller. Decisions begin to emerge from tension rather than clarity. A person might accept less than their true value in professional situations, delay important investments in their own growth, or move impulsively when anxiety peaks. At the same time, a powerful cultural narrative reinforces this internal state. Many people were taught that constant financial concern is a sign of maturity. The responsible adult is imagined as someone who is always thinking about bills, always calculating risks, always anticipating the next challenge. Relaxation around money can even trigger guilt, as though peace itself might invite irresponsibility. This belief quietly trains individuals to equate tension with competence. Yet a curious contradiction appears when observing people who consistently build stable prosperity over time. Their relationship with money rarely looks like permanent stress. Instead, it tends to resemble attentiveness combined with emotional steadiness. They think about money when necessary, organize it with intention, and then allow their attention to return to other dimensions of life. Their nervous systems remain open enough to notice connections, opportunities, and creative possibilities that tension would normally hide. Another subtle sign of internal misalignment appears in daily habits. A person might check their bank balance repeatedly even when no transactions have occurred. They may imagine potential losses before considering possible gains. Even during moments when finances are relatively stable, the body struggles to relax. Peace becomes conditional, postponed, until some imagined future level of security is achieved. This dynamic reveals that the core difficulty is rarely money itself. What truly shapes the experience is the meaning attached to it. When money becomes a symbol of danger, the mind attempts to control it more tightly. And like water held too firmly in the hand, the more pressure applied, the less fluid the relationship becomes. Before financial organization in the external world can fully transform, something quieter must first become visible. The internal pattern that turns money into a permanent alarm signal within the mind. Financial scarcity is often described as a condition measured in numbers, yet for many individuals, it exists long before any calculation is made. It becomes a physical state the body learns to inhabit. Long before adulthood introduces salaries, investments, or debts, the nervous system quietly absorbs emotional signals about money from the surrounding environment. Tone of voice, tension at the dinner table, whispered worries about bills, or repeated phrases about struggle and sacrifice begin to shape an internal narrative. Over time, these impressions settle into the body as expectations. This process helps explain why two people with similar financial circumstances can experience money in completely different ways. One may approach it with calm focus, while another feels an immediate tightening in the chest or a subtle wave of anxiety simply by opening a banking application. The numbers on the screen are identical, yet the internal response is not. The body has learned to interpret financial stimuli through memories, emotions, and associations that were formed years earlier. The brain's predictive nature amplifies this pattern. Instead of responding only to present circumstances, the nervous system constantly anticipates future scenarios based on past experiences. When earlier moments connected money with embarrassment, insecurity, or conflict, the mind begins forecasting those same emotional outcomes again and again. Even neutral situations, paying a bill, discussing income, making a purchase, can trigger reactions that belong more to old memories than to the present moment. Joe Dispenza often emphasizes that the body can become conditioned to familiar emotional states. Once an emotion is repeated enough times, the body expects it. Stress hormones rise more quickly, vigilance becomes automatic, and the nervous system prepares for difficulty even before a real challenge appears. When financial concern becomes habitual, the body may begin interpreting calm periods as temporary pauses rather than genuine stability. A subtle cycle forms from this pattern. The anticipation of financial difficulty generates tension. That tension produces mental scanning for possible problems. Each imagined problem reinforces the expectation that something will eventually go wrong. The brain releases small bursts of neurochemicals associated with alertness and urgency. which temporarily create a feeling of control. In a strange way, the drama of constant monitoring can become emotionally familiar, even comforting because it reinforces the belief that vigilance equals safety. Modern neuroscience also highlights how dopamine plays a role in reinforcing repetitive behaviors. Checking financial accounts repeatedly, comparing incomes or revisiting the same concerns can stimulate brief moments of relief or stimulation. These moments strengthen the habit loop, encouraging the mind to return to the same patterns even when they do not produce real solutions. What began as an attempt to stay informed gradually becomes a reflexive cycle of anticipation and tension. Many individuals attempt to counter this pattern by adopting optimistic language about prosperity. They repeat phrases about abundance, visualize future success, and try to maintain positive thinking. Yet if the body continues to interpret financial topics as threats, those words remain disconnected from emotional reality. The mind speaks one message while the nervous system sends another. This internal inconsistency often explains why intellectual understanding alone rarely transforms the deeper experience of money. Emotional coherence begins to emerge when the body is no longer reacting to financial discussions as if they were emergencies. Instead of escalating tension, the nervous system gradually learns that these situations can be approached with steadiness. Thoughts become clearer, breathing slows, and attention expands beyond immediate worry. Decisions made from this state tend to reflect discernment rather than urgency. The image of a tuning fork helps illustrate this shift. When two instruments vibrate at the same frequency, they resonate with each other. If one instrument produces only noise and tension, harmony becomes impossible. In the same way, the internal emotional tone through which a person engages with money influences the quality of decisions, opportunities, and relationships that emerge around it. Prosperity often begins approaching quietly when the body no longer interprets growth, resources, and financial expansion as signals of potential danger. For many people, the obstacles that seem to block prosperity are not always visible in the surface of their daily actions. Effort may be present, discipline may be present, years of dedication may even exist, yet progress appears slower than expected, or opportunities seem to fade just before they fully materialize. In situations like this, the explanation is often searched for in external circumstances, economic conditions, professional environments, or simple bad luck. However, psychology has long suggested that another layer may be operating quietly beneath conscious awareness. Carl Jung described the concept of the shadow as the collection of feelings, beliefs, and experiences that individuals do not fully recognize or accept within themselves. These elements do not disappear simply because they remain unexamined. Instead, they continue influencing perception, decisions, and behavior from behind the scenes. When applied to financial life, this hidden layer can shape the way people approach success, value, and opportunity without them realizing it. Money carries symbolic meaning far beyond its practical function. It represents independence, influence, visibility, and sometimes even identity. Because of this symbolic weight, prosperity can awaken emotional responses that go deeper than financial logic. Some individuals unconsciously associate increased income with separation from their family's history or community identity. Others feel subtle discomfort at the idea of standing out, attracting attention, or becoming the subject of comparison. These emotions rarely appear openly in thought, yet they quietly influence the choices a person makes. Consider how easily the mind can hold two conflicting beliefs at once. On the conscious level, a person may sincerely desire financial growth and stability. They imagine the freedom it would provide, the opportunities it could create, and the sense of security it might bring to their loved ones. At the same time, deeper layers of identity may still carry old narratives about struggle, sacrifice, or humility. If prosperity feels like a departure from those inherited narratives, an invisible tension begins to form. This tension can manifest in subtle patterns. Opportunities appear, yet hesitation emerges just at the moment commitment is required. A project that could expand income is postponed until the initial enthusiasm fades. Prices for one's work remain lower than the true value provided, even when demand clearly supports higher compensation. Each individual decision appears reasonable in isolation, but together they form a pattern that slows financial expansion. Emotional memory often contributes to this process. Past experiences involving mistakes, failed investments, or financial embarrassment may leave impressions that linger long after the situation itself has passed. The mind stores these moments as warnings, shaping future expectations. Even when new opportunities arise under completely different circumstances, the nervous system may react with caution that feels disproportionate to the present reality. The idea that money amplifies what already exists internally also helps illuminate this dynamic. Financial resources do not automatically transform identity, they often intensify the qualities already present. If confidence and clarity exist, prosperity can expand them. If unresolved fears or doubts remain active, additional resources may simply magnify those same tensions. Because of this, individuals sometimes distance themselves from growth without consciously realizing why. A symbolic image can help capture this phenomenon. Imagine a house that has stood for decades. From the outside, a fresh coat of paint may create the appearance of renovation, yet if the foundation beneath the structure has developed cracks over time, the building will continue to shift. The exterior improvement cannot stabilize what lies beneath the surface. In the same way, financial goals alone rarely transform a person's relationship with prosperity. When deeper emotional narratives about worth, belonging, and safety remain unexamined, they continue shaping outcomes quietly. Sustainable expansion tends to emerge when internal identity evolves alongside external ambition, allowing growth to feel not only possible, but genuinely compatible with who a person believes themselves to be. A mature relationship with money does not emerge from avoiding financial realities, nor from surrendering emotional stability to every fluctuation of income or expense. It develops through a balance that many people rarely experience, the ability to think clearly about resources while maintaining an internal state that is not governed by fear. In this balance, money remains important, but it no longer becomes the authority that dictates emotional equilibrium. When the mind relates to money primarily through urgency, perception becomes distorted. Every financial decision begins to carry exaggerated emotional weight. Small changes in income can feel catastrophic, while periods of stability are interpreted as temporary illusions that could collapse at any moment. The nervous system, conditioned by repeated worry, remains in a subtle state of alarm. From this position, even thoughtful planning can feel overwhelming. A different internal posture gradually transforms this experience. In that posture, financial awareness is present without emotional turbulence dominating the process. Numbers are examined with attention, but the body remains relatively calm while doing so. This difference may appear small, yet it dramatically changes how information is processed. When the nervous system is regulated, the brain's capacity for long-term thinking, creativity, and discernment expands. Possibilities that once seemed hidden within anxiety begin to surface with greater clarity. The internal sequence through which decisions emerge becomes important here. Thought, emotion, and action constantly influence one another. When thoughts are shaped by panic, emotions intensify that panic and actions become reactive. But when thoughts arise within a steadier emotional field, the resulting actions tend to reflect intention rather than urgency. The same financial situation can therefore produce entirely different outcomes, depending on the internal state from which it is approached. Silence within the mind often becomes an underestimated ally in this process. In moments where financial pressure feels overwhelming, the immediate impulse is usually to think harder, analyze faster, and mentally rehearse every possible scenario. Yet excessive mental noise can obscure rather than clarify reality. When the mind pauses long enough for the body to settle, perception often widens. The situation remains the same, but the quality of attention changes. Instead of reacting, the mind begins observing. This quieter internal state also influences timing. Many opportunities require patience, trust in gradual development, and the ability to recognize subtle signals within complex environments. When the nervous system is dominated by desperation, those signals are often missed. Urgency compresses time, creating the illusion that every decision must be immediate. Stability, by contrast, restores a sense of rhythm. Choices unfold in alignment with circumstances rather than in opposition to them. Another shift emerges in how individuals relate to responsibility. Emotional steadiness does not eliminate the practical dimensions of financial life. Budgets still require organization, agreements still require clarity, and long-term planning remains necessary. Yet these tasks begin to feel different when they are no longer driven by the underlying belief that everything might collapse at any moment. Responsibility transforms from a defensive posture into a constructive one. Gradually, a new internal environment forms through repeated small interactions with money. Conversations about value become more direct. Receiving compensation no longer triggers subtle discomfort. Decisions about spending, saving, or investing begin reflecting long-term vision rather than momentary fear. None of these changes appear dramatic in isolation, but together they reshape the emotional landscape surrounding financial life. An image from nature helps capture this process. Strong roots do not grow in constantly disturbed soil. For a tree to expand upward, the ground beneath it must remain stable long enough for those roots to anchor deeply. Prosperity operates in a similar way. When emotional ground becomes steady, expansion has somewhere secure to develop, allowing growth to unfold without the constant threat of internal turbulence. Throughout this reflection, one idea gradually becomes clear. Excessive financial worry rarely produces the stability it promises. What often appears as caution or responsibility can slowly transform into a mental environment where scarcity is rehearsed every day. The mind attempts to protect the future by anticipating problems, yet the body absorbs these repeated signals as present reality. Over time, the nervous system learns to associate money with tension, urgency, and threat. This internal conditioning shapes far more than emotions. It influences perception, timing, and the range of possibilities a person is able to recognize. When attention is dominated by fear of loss, creativity narrows and opportunities often pass unnoticed. The individual may work harder than ever, yet still feel as if progress remains distant or fragile. Many thinkers who studied success and human psychology recognized this invisible layer. Napoleon Hill described how organized thought and emotional persistence shape the conditions through which prosperity emerges. Carl Jung, in a different field, reminded us that what remains unexamined within the psyche continues guiding choices quietly from behind the scenes. Together, these perspectives suggest that financial growth does not begin only with numbers or strategies. It begins with awareness. Prosperity is not merely the act of receiving more. It also involves removing the internal barriers that repel what is already trying to arrive. When money is no longer treated as a judge, a threat, or a rescue, it returns to its natural role as a tool, one that reflects the clarity, maturity, and coherence of the person who manages it. In that moment, attention shifts upward. Instead of staring endlessly at the ground of scarcity, the mind begins noticing the wider sky of possibilities that had always been present. Have you ever stopped to wonder whether your constant concern about money is truly protecting you, or quietly keeping you trapped in the same emotional state of scarcity? If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you can continue exploring ideas that help transform the way the mind, emotions, and decisions shape your reality. New perspectives often begin with a single moment of awareness. And if this topic sparks something inside you, continue watching the next video appearing on the final screen. It expands this conversation and reveals another hidden pattern that silently influences prosperity, perception, and personal freedom.